Hello, bonjour, namaste, ni hao, and ohio, everybody. What is going on? It is Gale here. Welcome back to the YouTube channel once again for another Danmachi Season 5 video. And today, we are here with the cut contents for episode 14. Of course, it's been a while since I've uploaded a video on the channel. I do apologize on that. I've just been settling into this new pattern that I've got going on in real life with my IRL job, where I'm doing 4 days of work, 4 days off. So right now, I'm in my 4 days off period. So kind of wanted to take a day off to kind of settle everything at home, settle everything at work, and so on and so forth, get everything sorted out so that I could be prepared for this new pattern shift. And so it's the reason why I decided to take a day off from streaming and recording any content. But we're here finally to record the cut contents for episode 14. I'm ready to get into it. Of course, I've made a list of things I want to talk about in this video, so get ready, get excited for this video. And of course, if you guys going to enjoy this one, remember to leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know in the comment section down below, what do you guys think about the episode in terms of the cut contents that I talk about in this video? Let me know in the comment section down below. Of course, if you're a light novel reader, is there anything I missed out on? If you're an anime only person, what cut content would you like to see the most in the episode or outside of the episode potentially? Now, remember, this video isn't going to talk about animation or anything else in particular that, is already in a separate video. It's in the review video. You guys can go and check it out. This video is directly and only focused on the story and how it compares to the light novel. That's all I'm looking at in this video. If you want to check out the other aspects of the episode, be sure to check out the review video from a couple of days ago. It'll be pinned, I think, at the end of this video. You guys can click on the pop-up that'll appear on the video, and you guys can check out that video instead. Now, let's talk about episode 14 and cut content, shall we? Let's get right into it. Let's talk about it. Now, the biggest thing, I think, in my opinion, coming from this episode that I felt was cut quite, well, I wouldn't say heavily, but it was just done haphazardly, if you want to call it that. It was just done off a whim. They just put a little bit of it in a couple of sections and then they called it a day. And that is, of course, the Freya familia members' flashback sequences, as you guys might have seen throughout the episode, right? Especially in the first half of the episode, pretty much, I think it was. We obviously had Hayden and Hegni discussing their past and their reasons for worshipping Freya. We obviously had the Gulliver brothers and their past sequence. We saw that Freya came out of a room with a dwarf. You know, a lot of people were confused by that. And then, of course, we had Alan kneeling towards Freya, of course, you know, when they were talking about their past and when they joined the Freya familia, of course. And all of these sequences lasted not more than like 10 seconds in the episode, probably 15 seconds if you want to give it a little bit of credit. Now, to me, this was a little bit of an annoying thing for me personally. Like, I think when it comes to cut contents, right, at the end of the day, of course, if you're an anime only, you're obviously not going to pay too much attention to that. And of course, if there's something that pops up that you don't understand, that's when you get really confused. But for the most part, I felt like up until this season, when Danmachi used to cut content, the anime onlys really wouldn't pay too much attention unless the pacing was all over the place, like in season 2, for example, right? I think a lot of people loved season 1, season 3, season 4, even though they all had some form of cut contents. It's only this season, I would say, where because of the cut contents, we're getting to a point where anime onlys are getting a little bit confused with certain moments. And I think this is one of those moments where people were confused. Like, what happened? Like, for example, with the Gulliver brothers, what happened there? Nobody knows exactly what happened. Like, oh, Freya was in a room with a dwarf that came out and then there was a splash of blood. That's all we know. Were the Gulliver brothers with Freya at the time, not with Freya at the time? And all of that jazz is a little bit confusing. Now, we of course can kind of interpret that, of course, the Gulliver brothers were rescued by Freya from this dwarf, but what was the repercussions? What exactly happened? How did it pan out? Everything of that sort is just entirely skipped out. And I think it doesn't only just hurt the specific Freya family member, it also hurts Freya as well. Because all of these moments that Freya has with every single one of these Freya family members, right? Be it Hedin and Hegni, be it the Gulliver brothers, be it Alan and Anya, be it Otaro, we don't also get to see what makes Freya a good person as well. And what we also don't have as well, on top of all of these Freya familia flashback sequences, is also Freya's past, which has been cut so far. Again, do I think there's a small chance that they could show it in the next episode? Probably. Do I think they will show it? Probably not. is what I think is going to happen. I don't think we're going to see the rest of Freya's past, sorry, specifically, which is kind of annoying because, again, we gotta get to see what makes Freya who she is right now and why she is right now the way she is. But let's talk about the Freya familia flashback sequences. I want to talk about the Hedin and Hegni's because it's the easiest one, and I think it's a case in which where, unfortunately, it's a case of the way Amori writes it in the light novel doesn't really translate well into the anime. Now, let me explain, and I'll explain why I believe that to be the case. Because when it comes to flashback sequences, naturally you would have dialogue, you'd have, flashback memory sequences where people are interacting and talking and so on and so forth. But the way Amori does it in the light novels is it's just a big description panel, basically, with no real dialogue outside of maybe like one line from Freya, in the case of Hedin and Hegni, for example. Because obviously we know, based on what Hedin and Hegni said, or when they were arguing about, rescuing Freya at the very beginning of the episode, is that they were in war with one another. They were kings of two realms, effectively, and Freya rescued them, basically. And that's all we know. Right, Freya rescued them from eternal war, and that's all we know. While that does happen, of course, right, it doesn't go into the details of how it happened, why they were saved, and what was the reasoning behind it. We just know that they were in war with one another, but we didn't know for how long, and the situation at hand, of course, right? And that doesn't help at all. But the thing is, in the book, it's literally just one page of just description. And while they could have done a flashback sequence explaining everything, I think the problem is when you try and adapt that full description into the anime, you end up having a sequence that's going to last about 3 minutes or so, basically, in just showing everything. And now if you include that with what happened with the Gulliver brothers and Alan and Anya as well, and not to mention that they skipped out on the episode 7 stuff with Alan and Anya as well, mind you, which I think would have had to be pushed over to here potentially to explain even better the Alan and Anya stuff. That would have been about 5 minutes. You're looking at 3 sequences that would have been about 12 minutes long potentially. Maybe less than that, 10 minutes, let's say. Let's say it would have been 10 minutes potentially, right? If it's 10 minutes long, the episode, that's half the length of the episode. And this is where, again, having these sequences be a part of a separate episode potentially, or, as I've been saying for a very long time, I think what they needed to do was adapt Freya Familia Chronicles. And again, I'm going to harp on about them not adapting these side stories, be it Sword or Toria, Ryu's Freya Familia Chronicles, or even the Freya Familia Chronicles in itself, has negatively impacted the season as a whole. Don't get me wrong, a lot of people can say, oh, the animation was bad, the consistency has been bad in the animation, oh, this was bad, that was bad in terms of music or visual, the visuals or whatever it may be, right? My biggest problem, more so than anything else, more so than the pacing, more so than the animation, is the connection between the side stories to this season. Up until now, for Danmachi, from season 1 to season 4, them skipping out on Sword or Toria, them skipping out on Familia Chronicles, didn't affect the main series as much as it is in this season. In this season, missing out on Ryu Familia Chronicles, missing out on Freya Familia Chronicles, missing out on Sword or Toria has negatively impacted the impact of the season. Not to mention skipping out on volume 8, skipping out on volume 15. This is now where we're getting to a point where this is not feasible anymore. I genuinely fear for what's going to happen from this season onwards. I've been talking about how I don't believe season 6 should happen if they don't do any of the other seasons or Sword or Toria or anything of that sort. But I seriously doubt that that is going to happen, where they're going to stop season 6 for other things. They're just going to move on to season 6 is my fear, and I really think it's going to happen. And I think that's going to be a bad thing, because if this season was bad in terms of the pacing and the cut contents more so, I would say it's going to be even worse in season 6 in my personal opinion, based on what I know of what's coming up, purely because of the fact that we're just ignoring all these side contents, because Amori isn't making the story based on, oh, these are going to be just filler stories that don't impact the main story. No, they all impact the main story, and they impact the characters that are integral to the story, and that's the problem here. While on one hand, I love the fact that Amori's managed to somehow get all of these side characters to be super imperative, super important, them cutting these contents in the season has not helped. Ideally, what I would have done for season 5, and this is again my opinion, and I'm going to explain how the Freya Familia members flashback sequences could have come into play here, is I would have done Freya Familia Chronicles before season 5 happened. I would have done it for, I think, it could have been a 6-episode, 7-episode, maybe mini-series that you could have done as a web series potentially, right? I think it would have been a good, solid mini-series that you could have had on the web, and you could have promoted it really well and everything, and you would have had an amazing reception to it as well, because it would have been involving you in a side story that, you know, obviously has only been adapted in Danmimo and of course as a manga, right? Not to mention there is a manga for it, so they could have easily used the manga as inspiration to make the adaptation as well. They wouldn't have needed to use the light novel descriptions. They could have just used the manga and used the storyboarding there to make the anime happen as well, which would have been amazing, right? And that would have done so well. That would have done so well because it could have set up the season 5 stuff super nicely as well, because you would have had Freya Familia's backstory. You would have had Freya's backstory implemented into that. You would have been able to condense all of that and give us a good indication of what to expect from the Freya Familia going into the season. That would have helped so much more, and it would have also given them a lot of time to prepare for season 5 as well. They wouldn't have had to release season 5 in, you know, they wouldn't have had to release it in fall 2024. They could have done the mini-series in fall 2024 and saved season 5 for spring 2025 or even winter 2025. Do 6 or 8 episodes in the fall season, take a 4 or 5 week break basically during the winter, right? And then come in January and start with episode 1 onwards. That would have helped so much more. And I think that's something that is quite annoying because, again, like I said, you know, we missed out on a lot of the past sequences with the Gulliver brothers, you know, explaining like how they were slaves basically for that dwarf, and, you know, what Freya had to do basically was effectively, for lack of a better way of putting it, sleep with the dwarf to be able to get them out of the dwarf's grasp. And of course, in a fit of blind rage is what happened basically in the episode, as you saw, right? The Gulliver brothers got so mad that this savior of theirs, this lady who is rescuing them, had to sully herself to basically rescue them. They were so mad that they killed the dwarf, as you might have seen in the episode with the blood splash, right? That was what it was insinuating, right? That was entirely cut. Alan and Anya's backstory of their village being destroyed and how, you know, Freya gave Alan an opportunity to be saved and, you know, get stronger to protect Anya, obviously cut to an extent. Of course, we got an explanation of it, but that whole backstory of Anya and Alan, you know, when they were younger and what happened to them was cut basically in a previous episode. Otarl and, Freya's dialogue. We just saw Freya, you know, putting her hand out to Otarl, but that dialogue between them that was supposed to be there, cut as well. Hegni and Hayden, their eternal war, and that whole situation and scenario, cut entirely basically. No flashback sequence to that. These are things that could have helped so much in terms of the story with the Freya family members, but it would have also helped with Freya herself in terms of showing how she is as an individual. Why, you know, what we're seeing in the anime doesn't help at all, because it's just cutting away all of these integral things that, you know, give us a different perspective on Freya. So in my opinion, I think that is something I'm very critical about right now in terms of the season, to be honest. I think that is something I'm not very happy with in this episode, to be quite honest. I'm appreciative that they even included it, to be honest, because there's a very good chance they could have just ignored and not done any of the flashback sequences at all. But while I am glad that they included them, to a lot of people, everybody's telling me like, why include it if they're not going to explain it properly, to which I can't really deny that they're wrong in that sense, because it just would add to more confusion to people, right, as to why they're even there, what the hell happened there. But yeah, it's one of those things where I think it would have just been better to have it as a separate thing before the season started or something like that. Maybe as a prequel, pre-episode or something, like an episode 0 or something. They could have even done it as that. Maybe they didn't need to do the whole Freya Familia Chronicles, but as episode 0, set up Freya's past, just have show Freya herself, her past, and then show each Freya Familia's past maybe. I don't know if that would have worked. I don't know if that would have been the better way of doing it, but I think it would have been something that would have helped at least with the direction and storytelling aspect of the Freya familia and Freya herself, in my personal opinion. Now, we move on to a little bit later on. I think we will move on to a little bit later on to another sequence that was just entirely cut from the anime, and that's the Loki familia's reactions. And more particularly, I would say, excluding everybody else, it's more so we skipped out on Finn, Freya, and Gareth talking about Otarl's beastification and also his general move, Hildis Vinny, of course. In this context, when they were in the light novel, when they were talking and they cut away to them and their discussion, we find out that Otarl is nearly level 8, and that's just entirely cut. That would have been such a good way to show Otarl's strength, for one, explain how strong Otarl is exactly, because everybody knows he's level 7, but where is he on the level 7 scale? And that would have confirmed that he's basically nearing level 8, which is of course near the strongest individuals of the Zeus and Hera era, basically, and that would have given us a good indication of where he actually stands, or the anime only specifically where he stands. Of course, we already know as light novel readers how strong he is, but as an anime only, you do not know where he stands, what strength he truly is, because obviously he, up until now, was the only level 7. So of course, seeing him being so strong shows the difference between like a level 7 and a couple of level 6s and 5s and stuff like that. But the fact that he's near level 8 also shows how much stronger he actually is as well. Again, this is coming back to the whole thing of, I don't know why they're cutting the Loki familia sequences from these episodes, to be quite honest. I mean, a lot of people will probably say bias or whatever it is. I don't know. Whatever the reason is, they need to stop doing it, to be quite honest. I don't get their obsession with it. I don't know if they don't think it's important, or do they think it's something that's irrelevant. But I feel like that sort of thing, it's just a 30-second thing. It's not even something that I would say takes longer than a minute, because all you have to do is cut frame, go to Loki, the Loki familia, go to Gareth, Finn, and Rivera just sitting there. You can use a pre-existing assets as well to do that. You don't even need to you know reanimate the whole thing and everything, because all you're doing is moving their lips. They just need to be sitting down and just them talking and saying, oh, he's almost there. Yeah, he's near level 8. And that's it. And then Gareth or somebody, or one of the three, can also say like he's nearing Zeus and the Hera familia's, you know, monsters, basically, or whatever. He's nearing their level, basically. He's nearing Zeus and Hera familia's adventures, basically, in terms of level. That's all they needed to do. 3 lines wouldn't have taken more than 30 seconds. Why? No idea. I don't know why they cut it, or why they don't want to include that, because it's such a simple thing and it wouldn't take a lot of time for them to include in the episode. That's just my opinion, of course, right? But yeah, I don't know why it's been cut. The other thing that was cut about Otarl as well was, of course, the explanation of his transformation, the beastification, or beast mode, as the anime calls it. We obviously saw Loki and Hermes talking about it a little bit, but in the light novel, Bet talks about it a little bit more, and of course, there's a description that nobody says in the light novel. It's just a description that's an add-on. It's a narrator speaking, basically. They mention in the light novel that very few races of the beast people can actually achieve it, which shows Otarl's, like, you know, how special he is in that sense, right? They also give an example about, of course, werewolves being able to use it. So like Bet can also use beastification, but only under the full moon. But Bet in the actual light novel talks about how Otarl could possibly do it when and where he wants it to be used, and that is something special as well. And then of course they also add, again, just like I said earlier on, how with the beast mode, Otarl is basically a level 8 character. So again, that's something that's cut in itself, and that's something that could have added to the episode, but unfortunately it's skipped entirely. Now, that, I would say, was a majority of what was cut in the sense of the episode. Now, I will say, to be quite honest, before I move on to one more point, which it's not a cut from volume 18, but it's more so just a general thing I want to talk about, again, referring back to what I was talking about earlier on about side stories being cut and stuff like that, and how side stories are impacting the main series. I want to give that another example in a bit. But before I go on, I want to just talk about this episode as a whole. This episode as a whole, in terms of story, in terms of cut content, actually wasn't bad. I would say in terms of the biggest thing that was, you could argue, cut, it was the Loki familiar discussion. That's it. Realistically, in terms of the other parts, they were there but not explained fully, and that, I think, is what's hurting these episodes. Again, you know, you remove the opening and ending, maybe you would have had a little bit more time to give to those flashback sequences and everything, and maybe that would have explained it a little bit better, maybe. I don't know. But still, nonetheless, I would say a majority of what's being destroyed is mainly content that's being shortened, in the sense. Again, more episodes would have helped. Maybe removing the opening and ending again would help. I'm begging. If this final episode has the opening and ending again, I am about to scream. I'm gonna scream. I will scream, okay? We will be there. I will be screaming. But they need to not have the opening and ending. I don't think these final 2 episodes should have had the opening and ending. I mean, I don't think the War Games section at all should have had the opening and ending. But we did, so it is what it is. But I would say, yeah, like I said, I think in terms of the story and the cut content side of things, the main issue I have with this episode is literally the Loki familiar stuff and the level 8 talks, basically. I think the rest is fine for the most part. I say fine in the sense of, like, as a light novel reader, I'm okay with it. I'm not happy with it. I'm not like saying like it's good what they've done. I'm okay with it based on the fact that we only had the time we had. If we had more time, if we had an opportunity to do something differently, absolutely, I would have changed some things. I would have made it a little bit better. No opening ending, or, you know, adding, like, as I said, a preseason thing, basically a preseason mini-series, effectively, you could say, kind of thing, right? That is what I would like. But alas, this is what we got. So it's better than what I've seen in some previous episodes, and especially in previous seasons, is what I will say. Again, I think the biggest culprit for cut contents and poorly done contents is still, I'd say, episode 7 or episode 5. I think it's one of those 2 episodes pretty much that I think they've done pretty poor, in my opinion, was done pretty poorly. Or yeah, episode 5 or 7 is what I would say was done pretty poorly, in my personal opinion. Now, the other thing I want to talk about before we wrap up this cut contents video is Bet and Anya's thing. When, you know, Anya remembers Bet running through the corridor with her, right? In that sequence, you obviously see Bet being a lot more calmer and his behavior being completely different. Of course, you still see him in earlier episodes being still a little bit rude, a little bit hot-headed as well, but comparatively to season 1, it's totally different, right? Comparatively to season 1 and even season 3 to an extent, it's completely different. And this is where I would say again that missing out on Sword Oratoria has not helped at all, because you don't understand. A lot of anime onlys potentially would have a little bit of a shock in terms of how Bet has changed his character so much, and people will say, oh, people might use an example of like, oh, season 1, you know, Belle being so strong changed him. But no, that's not really a good reason to change your attitude, in my personal opinion. And us skipping out on Sword Oratoria, especially volume 7 and 8, which was obviously focused around Bet and his past, skipping out on that and showing his behavioral changes doesn't help at all. And again, it comes down to what I was talking about earlier on, where skipping out on Familiar Chronicles, Sword Oratoria, you name it, is not helping at all. And we're coming to a point where we need this content to be in the anime. But alas, it is what it is. This is what we have to deal with, and this is what we've got. So we're gonna have to rock with it. Now, I'm hoping, praying, again, like I said, with the final episode airing, we might finally get an announcement for what's coming up next for Danmachi's anime side of things, be it a Stray record or whatever it is. I'm again praying and hoping it's Sword Oratoria, because if it is Sword Oratoria, we're in for a bit of a ride and seeing how they'll handle that. But of course, I'm leaning a little bit more towards, if they're gonna do something, it's either a Stray record or they're already announcing the next season, which I really hope it's not the case, because technically they can't even, I mean, they could technically do the next season, do volume 19 and 20 and end it on a cliffhanger, technically, but I would rather they not, in the sense of just because of what's coming up and how Mori's doing the light novels and everything. I'd rather they not, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyways, this is it for Cut Contents episode 14, of course. We'll be back for the final episode. That is going to be dropping in 2 days' time. We will be live for that episode, by the way, as well. Be sure to come by to watch that episode, of course. We will be live for that. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Once again, I do apologize that this took a little bit longer than expected. I appreciate all of y'all for watching the videos, as always, and I will see you guys for the next one. Until then, take it easy, everybody. Ciao. Bye-bye.